On this edition of the Culture Club, I want to talk about a movie I've seen many times, 500 Days of Summer. If you don't quite remember it, here is a bit from the trailer.
This is a story of boy meets girl.
They made a statue of us.
The boy, Tom Hansen, grew up believing that he'd never truly be happy until the day he met the one. The girl, Summer Finn, did not share this belief.
Rummaging for answers.
You should know up front, this is not a love story.
I think we should stop seeing each other.
Just like that?
Just like that.
So I just watched 500 Days of Summer right before starting doing this video, and as I said, I've seen it many times at this point. I saw it originally when it came out in theaters back in 2008, I believe it was maybe 2009, and I've probably seen it something like 8 times, maybe 10 times since then. And for the sort of movie that it is, if you've seen it before, that might seem a little bit odd, and I understand that over the course of this discussion about the movie and my continued thoughts about it, I'm going to come off as kind of cheesy and pathetic, but that's what I like about the movie, is that for guys who don't necessarily have a lot of movies that can bring this out of them, I think 500 Days of Summer speaks to a certain type of guy who grew up in a certain type of way and perhaps thought about women or still thinks about women the way that the character in the movie did. And so there's a couple different sections I want to talk about, but first I do want to say, in the first 5 times that I saw it, I changed my opinion on Summer as a character many times. Obviously, you have Tom and you have Summer. We see things from the point of view of Tom, and so naturally we're going to perhaps empathize a bit with him more. But we do have to understand that it's not just that we only see things, we only see Summer when she interacts with him, which is totally true, but we see her through his eyes. The way that she speaks, everything that she does in the movie, I don't think that we're supposed to take it literally. Everything is from his point of view, and it's colored by what he thought about her and what he thought about women, especially early on. And I have to admit that the first 2 times I saw it, I thought that she was one of the best villains in a movie ever. Not because she's going around killing people or, trying to defraud someone. Nothing like that at all. But just the way that I feel like she manipulated Tom. And as I saw it more times, and as I got a little bit older over the course of those couple of years, I found that, no, that was me saying that because I felt like I had been manipulated in that way with previous women, when really it was just that I was misinterpreting them in the same way that Tom misinterpreted Summer. Summer was, in the end, very open with him from very early on, from before they were ever involved, about what she actually wanted. Now, did she blur the lines a little bit during the course of their relationship? Of course, she's not a perfect person, but she was pretty upfront with him. And he went into the relationship doing what I believe a lot of people, I'm going to say a lot of men because I'm a man and that's the experience that I've had, but I think a lot of people do, where they hear what the person's saying, I don't want a relationship, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to win you over. I'm going to convince you that you actually do want this thing you think you don't want. And this is not a rom-com. This is not a love story, as they say in the beginning. It is a coming-of-age story, and part of coming of age for a lot of people, and certainly for me, is understanding that you can't do that, or that doing that is self-destructive. And so that's why by the 4th or 5th time I saw it, I realized, no, she's not a villain. She's not a perfect person, as I said, but she's just a person, and she acted the way that people act in relationships. And that's the way things go sometimes. Now, the next part is, as I said in the very beginning, I think that for guys who grew up in a certain way, and I don't know exactly what it is that causes this, I can only say that while I didn't listen to the Smiths or have the sort of devotion to Britain in the 70s that he had or anything like that, I think that from totally different inputs, I had the same sort of devotion to the idea of true love, or that there's the one out there for you, or that there's destiny when it comes to who you'll meet and things like that. I listened to a lot of Boys to Men growing up and other R&B and watched the sorts of movies, so movies and music, just like with him, that teaches you unrealistic things about relationships. And it's interesting that it's a movie that has to point out that movies are doing that to you. But I had much the same idea about relationships as he did. And so I'd already largely moved on by 2008 from feeling that way. I was more matured, I was more adult, but it is interesting to see a movie so perfectly depict that phase for men. We have a lot of relationship movies out there. Like half of all movies are about relationships, obviously. And they're not all made for women. They're not all from the point of view of women. But even the ones where the man is the main character, it tends to be more about what men think they're supposed to be like in a relationship, or what they're supposed to think about women, than what they actually do. And again, this is not all men, but I think that 500 Days of Summer is one of the few movies that really describes not just the heartache of getting over a woman when you're a young man, when you're supposed to be just strong and stoic and not supposed to be affected, even when you see that she's not affected. It describes that, but it also describes how you go into these relationships and how you are scarred and how you how you develop and evolve. Those two things combined is devolve. It actually means the opposite of that. And I don't know a lot of movies like that. I'm planning on watching High Fidelity later on, which I've never seen. I've heard that there are some similarities between them, but up until seeing that, at the very least, 500 Days of Summer remains kind of unique for me. Now, of course, I mentioned cheesiness, and at the end of the day, while the movie is very realistic and goes into territory that a lot of movies do not, it does have a bit of a cheesy message in the end, and this is a spoiler. You should understand I've already spoiled a shit ton of stuff. He ends up meeting another woman, and her name is Autumn, and it starts over at 1 and all that, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And so the idea is that you do have to be realistic, and you do have to see people for who they really are, and not simply take a woman or a man and say, I want you to be this thing, and I'm really attracted to you, and you seem cool, we have a lot in common, and that's enough, and you're nothing more than that. I'm just going to pour into you my expectations about relationships. You can't do that. But he still does in the end. There's destiny, and there's potentially true love. We don't know what ends up happening with Autumn. They didn't actually make that sequel, unfortunately. They weren't actually going to make the sequel. I don't want to get your hopes up. But it is a bit cheesy in the end. But it does have to leave on a high note, and that was a great high note to have. And even as I acknowledge that it's cheesy, and I've seen it 8 or 9 times, I mean, every time he looks at the camera, you gotta love it. And by the way, one of the funniest things I think I've ever seen in a movie is when he finally sleeps with Summer, and he goes outside, looks in the window of a car, and the reflection he sees isn't him, but it's Han Solo. I think everybody can associate with that, or at least every guy. Now, finally, and I do like the I guess structural mechanism that they used to show how they were jumping through the timeline with the days and how it reset. They did a lot of interesting tricks with that. That I think were great, but especially it's the idea of, in a lot of relationships, especially in 2015, it feels to me like there's so much blurriness between relationships that people, when they finally break up with someone, they already sort of know who they're going to end up with at that point because they've been talking to them, and I know that not everybody does that, not everybody certainly acts on it, but I feel like there is too much blurriness. I like the idea, at least, conceptually, if not in reality, of starting over. And no, this is the first day of a new part of my life, and maybe it'll be 10 days, or maybe it'll be 50, or maybe it'll be 500, but to think of it as that, and not totally blurred, like he has moved on from Summer at that point. I wish that life was as clean as that. And even just thinking about it, I think, could help people sort of transition more cleanly and more smoothly from one relationship into another, so as to not muddle your memories of the one that came before, but also not to ruin the chances of the one that comes after being great. So, look, those are some of my thoughts about the movie and the position that I think it has in a particular sort of culture. That's what this segment, Culture Club, is supposed to be about. It's not just whether the movie is awesome, but especially for these older movies, what can we take from them? What did they mean at that time? What can they mean today? And I don't think that 500 Days of Summer is a movie that everybody is constantly talking about or even watches necessarily, but if they don't, that would be a shame. I think that a lot of young people, especially young guys, maybe that were a little bit nerdy like me, maybe weren't really successful with women early on, I think they could learn a lot just by being exposed to the movie. And that said, it is, I think, one of my favorite movies. Not because it's the most exciting movie or anything like that, but just because it does mean something to me individually. So if I made some sort of top 10 list, I would probably put it on there, as silly as that might sound to some of you. So thank you for listening to my ramblings about 500 Days of Summer in this edition of The Culture Club. Now is, of course, your chance to head down below. Let me know what you think about the movie if you've seen it, or what you think about my thoughts about the movie. I'll be looking forward to reading that, and I'll see you in the next one.